Thank you, Tim, for that. It's definitely one of the highlights, I think, from the cell and gene therapy space to hear those updates and sort of the state of the industry. And I think it's exciting also to see how much growth there has. You know, having been involved with ARM since the early days in 2009 and 10, where it's a much smaller group, and we were pretty excited when you had 15, 20 things in clinical trials. So a very different world back then. So it's really exciting to see. And it's finally the point where we can actually have real meaningful conversations about commercialization. And I think that's what makes this panel exciting. We've got three very talented folks from three very diverse but very exciting companies in our space. So what we'll probably start off with is we'll just have each of the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their company and sort of the state of their portfolio or pipeline and commercialization, and we'll go from there. So why don't we just go off to my left, start with Derek.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here in person and look forward to this panel with all of you. I know we have people, I think, online as well, too, so this is really exciting. My name is Derek Hicks. I'm the Chief Business Officer of Intellia Therapeutics. I've actually now been there for a little bit over a year. I have responsibility for strategy, early commercial, business development, and a variety of other areas. For those who are not familiar with Intellia, we're a gene editing company. We have actually 3 assets in the clinic. 2 are our assets. It's for TTR amyloidosis, 2001, which is we're hoping to submit an IND this year and get it into a pivotal study. And we also have an asset for hereditary angioedema, which is in phase 1, and we're also submitting an IND this year, and we hope to get that to a phase 2 clinical study. And we also have an asset that's partnered with Novartis for sickle cell. So that speech earlier around sickle cell obviously is an area of great importance, and it's great to see more development in that area as well. So it might be a little bit different relative to some of the other panelists, and I'm happy to give our perspective, but we are just starting to think about commercialization with these assets because, again, we're entering into a phase 2 study and also a pivotal for our 2 lead assets. And so commercialization is top of mind. I think because we're gene editing, there's some nuances that I look forward to discussing in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Derek. Matt?
Thanks, Devyn. My name is Matt Kapusta, Chief Executive Officer of Unicure. I've been with the company since the end of 2014. For those that are not familiar with Unicure, we are one of the initial pioneers within the field of AAV gene therapy. The company was actually founded, believe it or not, in 1998. So it's nearly a quarter of a century ago. And the founding of the company was really on a dream at that time for a one-time administered therapy for a highly ultra-orphan disease called lipoprotein lipase deficiency. And that product really was a labor of love for Unicure for the first 10 years of existence. And it was a very, very different time, but that product was actually approved in 2012 under exceptional circumstances in Europe, and it was the first approved AAV gene therapy product in the world. It was approved after 2 failed attempts in a highly politicized EU at that time, and the product was priced by one of our partners for about $1 million, and lots of jaws dropped. So it's amazing in 10 years how far we've come when we think about commercialization. We, of course, about a month ago, got our second AAV gene therapy product approved, a product called Hemgenix that we licensed to CSL Behring, and they'll be commercializing that globally. And we're obviously extremely excited for the milestone for Unicure, the milestone for the industry, and of course for the benefit of patients. We're doing a lot beyond Hemgenix. We have a pipeline of gene therapies that are focused largely on CNS disorders, which we see as extremely high unmet needs, and there's a lot of advantages for why gene therapies can be transformative treatments there, as well as liver-direct therapies. We have a lead program in Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is one of the largest monogenic disorders, and we are the only one-time administered gene therapy that is currently in clinical testing. We have two phase 1 studies in US and Europe, and we'll look forward to reading out data there. We have another program in temporal lobe epilepsy, which is a very large unmet need And one of the themes you'll see with uniQure is that we do have a vision that we hope a lot of you share in this room, that gene therapy is going to be migrating from these ultra rare diseases into more prevalent disorders. And in fact, hemophilia, although it is extremely rare, is one of the larger indications that are currently being served. And then we have another number of programs that we're looking at within the CNS disorders and liver disease, and we hope to bring at least one or two of those into the clinic this year. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit further is the importance of manufacturing in everything we do. It's impossible to think about commercialization without thinking about manufacturing. And one of the things that Glybera afforded us is the ability to invest in manufacturing very heavily for the last 15 years. So we look forward to talking more about that later on today.
Great, thank you, Matt. Suma.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Dan. I'm Suma Krishnan. I'm the founder and president of Krystal Biotech. So the history of Krystal is it was founded in 2015. It really took off. I mean, the lab was established in 2016, so we're relatively young. And Krystal was founded with a passion and love to find a therapy for a very, very debilitating disease called dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa. I mean, this disease is not as well known as some of the other diseases like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell or hemophilia. So this was more of a disease that was not well recognized. So in my past, I worked with this disease, and I realized that the approaches that were being used to tackle the disease was pretty painful and cumbersome. Like you needed to do a grafting, or needed to correct the skin and graft them. So the idea came about, how about a topical gene therapy? Pretty novel idea, never done before. So we needed to get a vector or a virus that was conducive to a topical application that could be redosed or reapplied. So that's where we started exploring the virus called HSV, which was not, unlike AAV or lentivirus, AAV specifically, was not well studied or well recognized, or was not even considered as a gene therapy. I mean, there was precedence of using the virus as an oncolytic virus. So what we did is we took the virus and we engineered it not to be an oncolytic, because HSV is already known to evade the immune system. So we further engineered it to make it more immune evasive, and we thought that you could now put genes such as collagen, which is large genes, about 9 and higher kb in size, which can't fit in an AAV or a lentivirus. And how about just putting the gene, you can put multiple copies, because HSV has a 150 kb genome, and you can pretty much create the space for large genes. And skin genes are usually large in size. So that was the concept, put the collagen 7 gene, topically applied it onto patients. These patients have, because they don't produce a protein called collagen 7, you can imagine that the skin is fragile. It's not a disease because the wounds won't close, but the wounds close, but they don't stay closed because you don't have this protein that holds the skin together. So that was a concept. The first thing we did was build a lab. So we are located in Pittsburgh, engineered the virus, got some good preclinical data in animal models, and quickly proceeded into the clinic. We were officially founded in 2016. 2017, we went IPO, so we were very lucky. In 1 year, we had the right investors, so we were able to raise money that helped us tremendously without actually raising Series E, Series B. So that was a very different path and unique, which we were successful with. But again, the key was, again, as Matt mentioned, is we realized very earlier on, as we saw success in our phase 1 studies, is outsourcing this and getting manufacturing and making your assays, your potency assays, outsourcing is not a viable path, because today we would not be where we are if we didn't invest in building our own manufacturing, building our labs, building our scientists with those expertise, and able to have control of that is where we are. Because of that, we are where we are. So as you may know, or may not know, some of you, we have filed the biologic application in June of last year. We are in our PDUFA timeline, and we are hopefully that we will get an approval pretty soon, and we can really help these patients, because this will be the first gene therapy for this space. So again, the things that we learned on the HSV vector, obviously we realized that we have more potential with this vector. We understood the virus. We understand what kind of cells that it can infect, what is its immune profile. So now we have expanded the platform. Obviously, we are sticking in skin. So we have rare skin diseases like ichthyosis. Again, these are diseases that there's no treatment and there's dire need for these for patients for a cure or for disease, modifying therapies for these diseases. And then another disease called Netherton. So skin is our biggest rare disease profile. In addition to that, we have realized that our virus is very infectious to epithelial cells. So we said, why not try lung and other other cell types? So again, we had good luck with being able to formulate a virus with the stability of the virus. We were able to nebulize it, and we got some good proof of concept study. So we have our first IND filed, which was cleared for cystic fibrosis. Now we are in the process of working with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and TDN to get our protocols approved, and hopefully we expect to get into clinic with that and show if that's a possible target for us. And obviously, because of lung, that has opened up to other lung diseases such as A1AT and also ciliary CPD with dyskinesia, big pulmonary dyskinesia, which again, these are large genes. So again, we think with our platform, we can address these diseases. So very excited about the future. And again, we are invested in our technology. We have built manufacturing. We have a smaller manufacturing, 10,000 square foot. We have invested a lot of time and effort in building a 150,000 square foot facility. As you can see, we are very committed to our technology, our platform, and again, to serve the rare diseases. So we're excited about the future.
Thank you, Suma. So you can see we've got three very actually quite different companies. We've got HSV commercializing alone. We've got an AAV-based gene therapy with a large partner commercializing as well as a portfolio. And then Intellia's got sort of a mix of both partnered and non-partnered assets. So I think what's really interesting is to think about when and how did you actually begin to think about commercialization? How early did you start planning for it? And maybe we'll start with Matt, if you can sort of tell us a little bit about that journey for Unicure.
Yeah, so very early is the reality. And in particular because of the novelty and the disruptive nature of the product. And for us, and this is in the context of hemophilia, and it also went into our calculation of why we decided for this particular product to partner it. Unusually in our field, right, hemophilia is actually a highly competitive market. It is one that is been decently served for the last 3 decades. So we had to think about commercialization and how we were going to win very, very early in the process. Probably, I would say, around the time that we, were starting to get real proof of concept in a phase 2. I mean, that's how early, several years before we were thinking about filing. Now, that doesn't mean we were investing tens of millions of dollars at that point in time, but we needed people within our company that were going to lead that charge and really help define the shape of what commercialization was going to look like. So I think, it's, and a lot of it around commercialization is in defining the value proposition. So that is a very complicated thing for one-time administered therapy. I mean, that is really the crux of why we're here and I think what makes this such an exciting field right now, and also hotly debated, is how do you think about a value proposition? And some of that has to come into how you design your clinical studies. So what is the endpoints that you're going to show? Is it going to be non-inferiority? Is it going to be superiority? Are you going to include quality of life measurements? So a lot of these things that ultimately impact healthcare economics do need to be thought about quite early within your clinical development plan, particularly in rare diseases where you may only need one clinical study before you get approved, right? So you can't do everything within a clinical study, but I think that I think the lesson is, and the crux of what I'm saying is, it's got to be very, very early is when you really are starting to think about it and how it's going to impact your plan.
Very good, thank you, Matt. And when did you actually make the decision that you wanted to partner?
Yeah, so this was in the end, as I mentioned, hemophilia is dominated by a half a dozen large pharma companies that have been entrenched within this field for 3 decades. They've built very deep relationships with the hemophilia community, and it was our view that as a biotech company, it's really hard to be good at one thing. To be good at 2 or 3 things is very challenging. So we were trying to be good at 2 things. We're trying to be good at developing products, and we're trying to be masters, leaders in manufacturing products. For us to try to build a commercial infrastructure and to try to compete in that highly competitive landscape, we thought was going to be challenging. So we decided that if we could get fair value or full value for the opportunity and partner and leverage the commercial infrastructure of one of these major players, we'd have to seriously consider it. We still have a mission of being a fully integrated biopharma company and building that commercialization, but it's going to be in another area outside of benign hematology.
Very good, thank you. So Suma, maybe you could comment a little bit how you've been thinking about commercialization, because you're taking a very different path, which is a much smaller disease, and you're commercializing it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, again, we went down the same path as Matt just mentioned. Obviously, we had partners that did come forward with us and wanted to, we had diligence and talks, and the terms just didn't work out for us. We felt like we didn't want to give up, because considering that we had a platform and we had a skin franchise, we felt it would be the best thing for us to build that commercial team internally, because we had a pipeline. So that we took the path because, again, it was not lucrative, attractive. And we had one of our board members that unfortunately passed away during COVID, who was a board member of Alexion, and he was the pivotal in giving us the advice as to why we should not partner, because he told us the stories of Alexion, how days were tough and bad and things, and how they progressed, and they stuck with it, and they took the first product, and that's what added the value. So I think his advice and the board's advice tremendously helped us to understand that maybe this is the path we don't want to take. I mean, when did we start building commercial? It's like, of course, when we had phase 2 positive data, there was the pandemic. We were, as Matt said, he's correct, because trying to tackle multiple stuff is tricky. So, but the focus for us was to get the phase 3 study, get our manufacturing, get the CMC in place, because you can't get into phase 3 till you have your CMC robust. Right around when we initiated our phase 3 study, we started building our internal commercial team. We hired a chief commercial officer. We started very slowly getting into bringing a few key people, like head of marketing, head of key commercial heads. And then that was in 2020. In 2021, when we felt things are looking good and this has got legs and success, we started really building our commercial team. As we got our positive data on our phase 3 results, I think that's when we really built our commercial team. So now we have a commercial team. We have a full sales of 20 sales folks, and we have a medical affairs, and we have so we have around 60 to 70 employees. 40% of the company is commercial. It's amazing how fast commercial can balloon. Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you, Suma. It's very exciting to see sort of the contrast, the different approaches. And then, Derek, from an Intellia perspective, you've got a mix of assets that are both wholly owned and partnered. What's been sort of the thinking behind that strategy, and was it impacted by the early commercial planning or other pieces?
Well, so everyone talked about the history of their company, so I think everyone has to remember that Intellia was founded in 2014, and I believe we went public in 2016, and right around the time then we went public, we did the deal with Regeneron, right? So Regeneron came in very early with us, I think more as a research and development partner, but obviously we're focused on commercialization with them as well too. So for our TTR asset for amyloidosis, I believe we're 75%, it's an Intellia owned asset, and 25% Regeneron owned asset. So they just came in very early as of the nature of the collaboration. I'm reflecting on some of the comments that Matt and Suma made, and I 100% agree with Matt. They both have more expertise in this topic than I do, but we've also made a decision to start very early as it relates to thinking through commercialization. I will say maybe the slight nuance on what we've done is, for our indications, I would say, like all of us, we're platform companies, and we have a lot of choices that we can make. So, I would say we've probably gone back even a little bit further, where we work very closely even with our research colleagues, like even in thinking through what are we going to advance, what are we not going to advance, what are the indications that we want to focus on, what don't we want to focus on. So, I have a small early commercial team that really works very closely with research to try to determine where we're going to put our chips. So I would say it starts, as Matt said, early, and I assume that we're all kind of doing the same thing. And over time, I would say we're slowly scaling up to build more commercial capabilities. We certainly don't have 40% of our company that's focused on research. I would probably say, on commercial, I'd probably say like 90% of our company is focused on research and tech ops. But we definitely, focus on commercial quite a bit. You talked about partnerships. Currently we have partners already with Regeneron, for example. So I think for us, we're really focused on continuing to generate that clinical data. And then, we'll revisit at some point in time. I certainly echo the comment that there's only so much you can do as a company. So, we have to make our bets and place them appropriately. I think the only other comment that I'd like to make when we talk about starting commercialization, I do have strong views on starting early. I think the last 5 years were very different than where we are right now. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see, what the next year or two offers in terms of do you approach that the same way? Because I think, as we're saying, you want to start early, but we're also looking at our capital very differently. And so I think in this environment, it's just something that we all have to really think about, as we think through commercialization. All of us are going to have a different profile on that. Some of us are going to say we want to do it earlier, and some are going to say, well, 2 years ago I was willing to do it. I may want to slow that down a little bit more until we get through these headwinds.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Derek, very important point. I think we will learn a lot over the next, you saw the list of upcoming regulatory actions, and I think we're going to learn a lot with these new launches, and we see what market access looks like, look at reimbursement, et cetera, the next couple of years. So it's going to be really telling. Let's talk a little bit about manufacturing for a second. I want to shift gears because I think, when I was at Pfizer for a while, we had a mix of assets, and obviously small molecules, it just sort of happens, right? Mm-hmm. Like you've got these massively talented people, they know it goes into the machine and it happens. And it's not really a massive concern, whereas here it completely shifts to where everything seems to be about manufacturing for our products, right? They're very complicated, and one misstep somewhere in analytical can really throw you for a loop. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about how you thought about manufacturing and getting to sort of your final form, if you will, as you've gone through the process. Why don't we start with Suma and then work our way back?
Sure. With gene therapies and manufacturing, we are in a new area, right? It's all single-use bioreactors, downstream purifications, and some of those equipments are new to the industry too, and there's no history of some of those equipment and all of the hardware, the tubings. It's pretty complex. And I don't think you really understand and appreciate it till you start, when you're knee-deep in it. When you start making your first batches, you think, great, this works fine, and we made our first product, and then you have no idea what's coming down because it's like complicated. So, especially with COVID and with some of the supply chain issues, these kind of single-use systems, you could run more into trouble with that. So I think you have to think very much upfront, because as we filed the BLA and we are through the review session, and this should come as no surprise, 80% of the questions are CMC. There's not a single week that goes back with a CMC. I think the reason is because even within the agency, it's new. We had our FDA inspection. They've never seen the bioreactor. They've never seen these connectors and parts. They're reviewing these sections of the dossier and asking you questions about sterility, how do you maintain. So it's complex. It's a little bit of educating the FDA, but it's a little bit of learning, and all of this is happening in parallel. So it can be very tricky. And at the same time, you're developing assays. These are, when you're developing your assays, especially for gene therapies, these are live cells and live organisms, but not, unlike small molecules, you can't control them. So again, as you develop the assays and you realize the variabilities of your assay, because when you are developing your process and you are making critical recommendations or critical changes based on your assays that are not fully developed and are giving you results, that can be very challenging. So these are things that you have to pay, a lot of effort and thought has to be given into. And that's what I think bringing manufacturing and assay development and all of that teams in-house under one roof is critical for the success of this. At least that's our experience. So
that's very helpful. I mean, I think it is amazing. I've underestimated historically, if you go back a decade, how critical manufacturing and CMC were going to be to proper commercialization or even getting to the clinic. And I think the number of holds we've seen in our space because of an analytical issue or something else is it makes it so critical. So Matt, tell us a little bit about the experience, because I believe you guys are actually going to do the manufacturing.
Yeah, we are. We're going to be doing global manufacturing for CSL Behring. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I remember reading in I don't know, Stat or somebody, Scott Gottlieb saying that the mandate for the FDA historically for small molecules is typically 80% focus on clinical, 20% CMC, and it's exactly flip for cell and gene therapy. It's 80% CMC and maybe 20% clinical. And of course that's a bit of a generic statement, but the truth is, if somebody's missing factor IX and I replace it, it's likely going to be effective. We never had a huge concern about our clinical data. The issue is, can you predictably, reliably manufacture this stuff so that what you showed in the clinic is going to be what you see commercially, and you can serve the market? And that sounds so simple, but it is really, really challenging. And I think what makes all of this challenging, even for the regulators, is that we're all doing it for the first time, right? So people are scaling up for the first time, and they're using potency assays for the first time, and they're doing process validation for the first time. So it is very challenging for us as companies as well as the regulators, but that is why the know-how and the technology platforms that you build are so important. The other aspect is, it's not only important for commercialization, but it's important for the speed and facility by which you can navigate through the regulatory pathway, right? So one of the things that we did with Hemgenix was we actually transitioned in between a phase 1/2 and a pivotal study. We tweaked the transgene, and we were actually able to convince the regulators that it was essentially the same product. And the only way we were able to do that was to do substantial chemistry comparability. And to the regulators' credit, they were willing to look at all this 45 different release tests and compare them between the two products and say, hey, look, you don't have to restart. You can continue. So it not only really enables commercialization, but it also enables reaching market, I think, in a more rapid manner.
Yeah, thank you. I remember when you guys did the switch to the Padua, and there was a lot of, I think a lot of us were wondering, what are the regulators going to do? But you guys were able to convince them, which is fantastic. So Derek, tell us a little bit how, particularly I think you've got two different approaches to manufacturing. Cell therapy obviously is much different from, say, an LNP-based manufacturing process, and how that sort of plays into the commercialization question.
Yeah, so one, I just want to reiterate, what the two panelists said. CMC and manufacturing is critical. There's been so many stories over the years where We've all seen it, right, where products have been put on hold. And, one of the issues that's, kind of up there is CMC. So I will say the good news is from our perspective, I mean, I think we've put together a great team in Intellia. Our head of tech ops actually has a strong background, and one of the areas that she's really kind of hyper-focused on is CMC. So I will say, to your point, there's a little bit of a difference on the ex vivo side versus the in vivo side. I think, certainly
It's a lot of a difference.
a lot of a difference. And I would say particularly, for us now, obviously, since we have the more advanced assets on the in vivo side with TTR and HAE, there's obviously a lot of focus on that area. So the one thing I will say is, it's kind of, I'm listening to the comments. One, it is the education, and it is very fascinating. I think as much as we're investing in the area and as much as we're, I think doing all that we can to make sure that our package is ready, there's education, right? There's education that's going on with the regulators in terms of the modality and what it is and how it works. And then I think the point that was raised earlier is, FDA is hiring, 100 new people, right? Some of them know about gene editing, some of them don't know about gene editing, some of them know about CMC, some of them don't know about CMC. So, a big part of this is education and trying to get in front of people to make sure they understand what we're doing and to also make sure that we understand how they're thinking about it so we can try to bridge that gap. So I would say for us, that's really a big piece of the CMC aspect is it's that bridge. And I think a lot of people, if you came from a small molecule mentality or if you came from a biologics mentality and you're trying to apply that to, what we do, that's not the right answer. So I think, we as an industry, and we're trying to lead this, is we need to think through how do we change that mindset. And that's really where I think a big focus it is for us, but I think it needs to be for all of us in terms of trying to shift that mentality.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Derek. I put a plug in for ARM here. We're at Arbor, we're a preclinical editing company, and so we look at ahead to what these folks like you guys are doing, and you're really carving the path, I think, for those of us who are following. And I think ARM is really a really nice spot for that sort of synthesis to come together, because the reality is, while there is some competition between companies in our space, the reality is we all want each other to succeed, because we can bring these therapies to patients and make a difference. And I think ARM plays a really important role there. So if your company's not a member of ARM, you should absolutely join. That's my little advert for Tim. So. As we think about, so manufacturing is a key piece, but we alluded to regulatory as well being a key piece of the puzzle and partnering. I guess if you've looked through where you are today, and I think particularly for Matt and Suma, what's the one thing, if you were to go back 3 or 5 years, you'd tell yourself that to keep an eye on it, or watch out, or here's something you should remember?
I'd love to hear this, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, is now that we're in the tail end, almost coming to the tail end of the review of our application and the inspections being completed, there are a lot of lessons learned, because again, I think we have this fear of the agency, right? Oh my God, these regulations, these, the specs and things like that. But as you walk through the process with them, and you go through the inspections, you realize they're learning too. So some of it is you have to convince them. You have to be confident about your data, you have to be confident about your science, you have to be confident about what you do, and it's just getting them up to speed. Mm-hmm. The things that you should pay, if I have to look back, is obviously some of the things that's not obvious, that it's not in guidances, or it's something that you unfortunately learn going through it. That's an experience that you learn the first time, and maybe you'll get better and correct it the second time. Is some of this, you have to be very careful. FDA is very touchy. Like when you do your manufacturing, you have to lock it down. Even a small change they consider as a major change with comparability data, and you have to convince them, and then you have to put they're fine, but you have to generate the data, and then that can have impact on, the way they do the reviews, or they could extend your review cycles. So something silly like that you could avoid. For example, we just announced this morning our PDUFA got extended by 3 months. And we know exactly why it got extended. Again, if we were proactive and we knew, we could have avoided some of that, generating the data in a timely fashion. So these are things that experience you learn, and I think you can, again, I can only speak for myself. With our technology and our platform, I think now we have our technical team, our assay development team. I think they have learned everything. So I think second go around and third will be much easier, and we have a path that we can follow for our product.
Very good. Thank you, Suma. Matt?
Yeah, I think well, maybe there's two things I'll point out. I think one is that we talked about this a little bit around commercialization, about how early do you begin to think of it, and we said it, it's never early enough, and in many respects when you think about the regulatory process, or what is it going to take for me to get a product over the finish line, everything really needs to be thought about early. I mean, one of the things that the FDA has been telling all of us within cell and gene therapy is, at least from a manufacturing point of view, you should be thinking about it even in the research phase, the platform that you're using, thinking about, have a vision of how you're going to be commercializing it, because of the fact that the process is the product, right? So, that is one of the things that we try to do on most of the things at Unicure, is really try to have a consistent platform that we're utilizing from the very early research all the way up through commercialization. And it's not like you're not going to make changes, but the foundation of the platform is something that you have knowledge about, right? It's within platform and where you understand how it's going to perform. The second thing I would mention is that there are so many things that you don't know answers to, and the agency doesn't know answers to, but you just need to substantiate, right? You need to do a risk assessment. And I was just thinking about the work that we did to prepare for an inspection, which is which I fondly referred to as a prostate exam. It was but it was 18 months, right? And you get there and for a couple of weeks, and there's hundreds of questions, and they know, right, you're not going to absolutely airtight, bulletproof have answers, but they want to see that you've thought about it. They want to see a process. And I think that's something that is very important for all of us to keep in mind.
That's good. Yeah, Derek, anything to add?
So again, you two have been through this, so this is good to hear. I will say that we have this dialogue quite often in Intellia around starting early, right? And so I think that's our mindset as well. We talked about manufacturing, we talked about regulatory, but there's other areas that we haven't really hit on, like access, right? And when you're thinking about talking to people in Europe around reimbursement, you need to even start thinking about that now, and how are you going to get the data to be able to tell that story to to payers. So things like that you may not assume that you need to think about, you need to start sooner rather than later. So again, it's not just CMC, it's not just regulatory, there's a whole bunch of other areas that as a company, you have to decide if you have the capital to do all this sooner rather than later, because it's nice to say in theory we all want to do it earlier, but capital is limited, and those are choices that you're going to have to make. And again, we haven't gotten into that in details, but this is a very different market. The only other piece I would say that I think we're finding that we need to start through earlier, and Suma said it, it's education. I mean, for gene editing, we're a different modality, and I think as we talk across multiple stakeholders, we all are aligned that we want to get our products to patients sooner rather than later, but there's an education element that we need to do, and it's across multiple stakeholders. I can't even talk about 2001 and 2002, our lead products. I have to start with gene editing. What is gene editing? And make sure we're all on the same page, then I can start maybe talking about the different diseases, and then I can talk about our products. So we have to kind of start with that overarching education, and like you said, it's hopefully all of us helping each other out, because everyone has a different point of view and a different perspective, and if we can't get everyone on the same playing field, it just is going to slow down the process of getting products to patients. So that's kind of how we think about it, but again, this all starts with that same theme of starting early.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. I think it is really interesting, the market access and reimbursement. We're not going to talk a lot about that because that's a whole panel in itself. Obviously a critical piece of it, and it'll be, it's going to be fun to watch what you guys accomplish for the next year or two in that realm. One thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is the patient. Tim mentioned patients are a North Star, which I think that is for all companies in our space. And how have you engaged patient groups, and how has that been helpful? So maybe let's start Derek and then just move across.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, one, quite often we have town halls where we bring patients into, our town halls and our meetings at Intellia. We've had patients with TTR, we've had patients with HAE come, and they with AML as well, and they talk about what they're dealing with, right, and the conditions and some of the barriers and some of the challenges. So that's certainly something that I think helps put focus on what we're trying to do so that people realize there's an unmet need and we need to do whatever we can to get these products to patients sooner rather than later. The other thing is that, we are starting to think through more around engaging with patient advocacy groups and potentially even having a role that's focused on patient advocacy. I think if you look at some companies, they have chief patient advocacy officers, so that's certainly an area that we're thinking about investing in as well. I certainly would be curious to hear what, Matt and Suma have to say, but, I think really the bottom line is we are trying to make the patient center of everything that we do. And I think going back to the commercial aspect, I think you have to think about that even when you pick a product for commercialization, is are you really meeting a patient need? So I think that's the other way we think about it as well too, is making sure we're solving for something where there's really a significant unmet need.
That's great. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Derek said. It's so important for us to have the patient be in the center of everything we do. I mean, not only are they the customers, right, but also to have employees or investigators really understand what the needs are, right? So, for something like Huntington's disease, right, where we really have to understand what their journey is, what they prioritize. How they view safety in different aspects of the value proposition, how they think about the administration of the product. So not only is it important for us to connect the small things we do with the transformation that we can bring to them, but it's really important for our ability to develop the right product with the right product profile that we engage with those communities. They also are all or most of us are looking at mostly rare diseases, and these are really tight-knit communities where they, in hemophilia, for example, they go to camp together. They have hemophilia camps, and so it's really wonderful. And I would tell you personally, it's probably one of the most gratifying things that we probably do as executives is to interact with those communities and their families.
Thank you. Suma?
I mean, again, I second what these guys said. You have to engage with the patient advocacy groups. But in our case, with EB, especially with recessive dystrophic, it's a horrible disease. Babies are born, they're missing skin, and some of them get genetically tested, some don't. And what happens is, of course, when it's a new baby, the parent is in distress, they reach out to these patient organizations and they get engaged. But very quickly, in a couple of years, they drop off because there was no approved therapies. They figured out how to bandage the child, how to do the standard of care. It's complicated. So many of these patients sometimes completely drop off, and especially when they survive to adulthood, they start managing their life and they start. So I think it's very important for us, the work ahead is to engage with every age group, even with the older population. I mean, the average life expectancy of this disease is in the mid-30s. We know by clockwise by 25 or 26, these patients get squamous cell carcinoma because of the opening and closing of the wounds. So a lot of them succumb to squamous cell carcinoma or sepsis or skin infection. So again, I think it's a little bit harder work for us, but we are there already. We seek patient advocacy. Patients have patient, media groups. They all talk to each other. When they realize this, if your data gets published in a journal, we try to put it out there. We try to, as much media, we try to distribute saying that we have positive data, and then patients are engaged. They get on these social medias and they talk to each other. Hey, there's a drug, or they talk their experiences. I mean, even if you tell your patients you're not supposed to talk about your drug when you're in a clinical trial, they do. Yeah. They do. You can't help it, And through word of mouth, and I think there's a lot. That's what I think commercially it's very important for us. It's a derm disease. Not many dermatologists don't even see these patients. So you have to, target centers of excellence. Some of them, like you have Stanford or you have Cincinnati, where these patients usually go and do their first visit and meet some of these key KOLs. So we work with them. It's very important because they have a network of patients. So there is multiple channels how we get to them, because you need to let them know that there is a therapy and that they could get help. So it can be a little challenging and complicated. There's no one solution. It's a lot of learn, but it's getting a team out there, educating, So even it's 1 or 2 patients at a time, educating them, and we also offer what is called as genetic testing. So because this disease, you can have extreme, conditions, or you could have milder forms of it, but everybody needs a treatment. So we offer genetic testing for these patients. They can come in and, swab their samples and send it, and then we can, if we can let them know, what the status of the disease is. So things like that help in reaching out to the patients and the
Great.
approach. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So we are at time, but I just want to wrap up with, I think, one of the most exciting things about being in the cell and gene space is, the folks in this room, these companies, we are going to change the world, and that's what I love about it. It's such an exciting space. And so with that, I do want to thank our panelists. If you guys can help me thank them for their insights. We're just scratching the surface here. It is a much longer conversation, but it's going to be exciting to watch the successes over the coming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you.